in sending condolences to the family and many friends of my constituent Carl White, who died just before Christmas. Carl spent 32 years as a youth worker, including running the Meadows Youth Centre in my constituency. He was Mr. Meadows, a role model, mentor and friend to hundreds, if not thousands, of young people in Nottingham. And even after he retired, he was as busy as ever, volunteering for local community organisations and setting up free football sessions for local children just last summer. There could be no more fitting tribute than a debate in government time on the urgent need to reverse cuts to youth services, which are so vital in supporting our communities.
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that the family will be comforted by the really wonderful tribute that the Honourable Lady has played to Mr. White and the 32 years of service that she mentioned, and his continuing to inspire people even in his retirement. I think it is right that members do honour their constituents and their families in this way. I would suggest, as regards a debate, that it may be an opportunity to seek an adjournment debate, but I hope that in that debate the Honourable Lady will expand upon her moving tribute.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In North Devon, an ever-growing number of residents are unable to see an NHS dentist. Wait lists are now many years long, and while recognising that work is going on through the Department of Health to increase the number of homegrown dentists, this is at least 5 years away. Would my right honourable friend allocate government time to debate how we can rapidly take full advantage of Brexit and ensure international dentists, particularly where they are plentiful as in India, can more easily come and work here as NHS dentists in areas of severe shortfall like North Devon?
Leader.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend because in my own constituency I visited a dental practice in Peasdown St John, which has a brilliant Indian dentist providing fantastic service to the local community. The government does recognise that the registration process for some internationally qualified dental professionals can be bureaucratic and inefficient. The DHSC is currently working with General Dental Council on legislative proposals which will allow it greater flexibility to expand on registration options open to international applicants, and this includes the overseas registration exam. These proposals will be subject to public consultation, and the Department is also working with NHS England to reform the NHS dental system, which will seek to improve patient access and oral health, offer value for money for the NHS, and be designed with the profession in mind. Health Education England's Advancing Dental Care Review programme has recently started and seeks to develop dental education and training infrastructure that produces a skilled multi-professional oral healthcare workforce that can better support patient and population needs.
Lawrence Eshelman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government finally published the National Disability Strategy last July, but it has been met with disappointment from a number of my disabled Vauxhall constituents, and there hasn't been any practical measures or funding outlined in that. The Leader of the House will be aware that the strategy was released just before recess, so there has been no parliamentary time or scrutiny on that. Will he commit in this chamber, given the importance of that strategy, for us to have a debate on this? Thank you.
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the government is very committed to ensuring that disabled people have the support that they need. And it is worth pointing out that since 2013 we have reduced the disability employment gap by 4.9%, helping to get 1.8 million more disabled people into work. And there is also extra taxpayer support, £780 million a year, in SEND education. So I think things are being done, and the Health and Disability Green Paper proposals will be detailed in the White Paper that is set to be published in mid-2022. So I can assure the Honourable Lady that things are taking place, but that I would suggest if she wants a debate, she refer to the Backbench Business Committee, because I think there is a great deal to be said about this subject, and that will help contribute to the development of the White Paper.
Alton Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Grimsby Telegraph website is currently showing an article headed "Free NHS Prescriptions to be Axed from April." Mr Speaker, I believe this to be misleading. My understanding is that the ministers are considering whether to charge the age group 60 to 65 for prescriptions rather than the free ones they get at the moment. Could a minister come to the dispatch box to explain, clarify what exactly is proposed? Because many of my constituents are emailing me confused and worried.
As always, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question, because clearly when local journals run with stories of this kind, they create concern amongst people who are most unlikely to be affected, and he is right to be giving them the reassurance that they need and expect. And I would encourage journals of record to be more responsible, more accurate in what they produce. But I will also ensure that he gets a full answer from the department as to exactly what may be proposed.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I also wish everybody in this House a Happy New Year. In Bath, our fantastic hospital, the RUH, has declared a critical incident over the new year, which is ongoing due to COVID and non-COVID patients, staff sickness, absences, and the availability of beds due to the social care crisis. So the government has clearly been asleep at the wheel. So can we have a debate in government time, not just COVID statements, on this acute crisis in our hospitals to make sure that our hospital leaders actually are being heard? Clearly, their experience at the front line of the hospital crisis doesn't shine with the Prime Minister's assurances that there is, the NHS is not overwhelmed.
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable lady that the RUH does terrific work, and I went to see them recently, and it is a well-managed hospital that does its best under difficult circumstances. But I think our charge against the government is ill-founded. Taxpayers have provided an extra £5.4 billion to the NHS to respond to COVID-19 over the next 6 months, which takes the total to £34 billion this year. They've also given ambulance trusts an extra 55 million, because that has been one of the issues. I was very conscious when I visited the RUH that they do have an issue with the number of people who ought to be released into social care being considerably higher than normal, and that is a pressure that does often occur in the winter, but I think the very competent management at the RUH is doing a first-class job.
Teresa.
We have a debate on the impact of NHS COVID protocols on cancer sufferers, because I was very disturbed when a constituent got in touch to say that she needs weekly vital life-saving treatment at a hospital, and she's been told that if she by any chance comes into contact with someone who's tested positive for COVID, she won't be allowed that treatment.
Leader. I thank my right honourable friend. I would always say to honourable and right honourable members across the House that if they have specific constituent issues that they raise at business questions, I will always take them up directly afterwards with the relevant department. What I would say in terms of cancer treatment is that treatment rates for cancer are now back to usual levels. Since the pandemic began, over 480,000 people have started treatment for cancer, but there is record spending of £2 billion to deal with the backlog, and £8 billion over the next 3 years to deliver an extra 9 million checks, scans and operations for patients across the country. But I would reiterate my offer to take up her specific case directly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer the House to my register of interest. Children with disabilities often require specialist equipment to meet their needs, but due to lengthy delays in assessments, children's conditions worsen, resulting in complex surgery or interventions which could have been prevented. In a survey carried out by the charity New Life, 68% of families reported that right now their child is living with essential equipment, without essential equipment that they need. So can we have a debate in government time about the desperate situation that disabled children in need of equipment find themselves in due to delays in getting the equipment that they need right now?
Leader.
The honourable gentleman raises an important point, and I've already set out what the government has been doing in terms of a disability strategy. I think that it is actually better in these cases to deal with the individual cases, which I think as MPs we are very well positioned to do, and to take those up when they come to the attention of honourable members. And as I said to my right honourable friend, I'm always happy to try to facilitate that. I think sometimes giving headline figures in surveys is not particularly illuminating.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since coming to this House 2 years ago, I've raised on numerous occasions my concerns about the level of borrowing by Warrington Borough Council. The Labour Council now have debts of about £1.6 billion. Today, there are reports in the national newspapers that Together Energy will be the 26th energy company to enter administration. Now, that's particularly relevant for people in Warrington because £52 million of public money has been invested in that loss-making company by Warrington Borough Council. And that has a potentially catastrophic impact on local services were it to enter administration. So, can we have a debate in government time on how councils are using public money to invest in private companies? And can I again urge the government to launch an inquiry into this gambling practice by local councils?
Leader. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising that question. Just before the 2017 general election, I was on the Treasury Select Committee, and I was lobbying the then chairman of the committee that we should have an inquiry into exactly this subject, because councils are not there to speculate. They are there to run public services and to handle taxpayers' money well. I have a great quibble about using this word investment for government expenditure, because actually government is spending taxpayers' money. It shouldn't be talking about investing, it should recognise that it is using other people's money and therefore has a great fiduciary duty to spend it wisely, and that councils that don't should be held to account, both by members of Parliament, but also, of course, as they ultimately will be, by their electors.
Neil Hamby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During yesterday's COVID statement in response to the Shadow First Secretary of State, the Prime Minister made certain assertions about the UK government's support for the domestic diagnostics industry, which were patently untrue. And last night in my adjournment debate, the Paymaster General failed to answer any questions that I raised other than to demonstrate his enthusiasm for profiteering. So the UK diagnostics industry only want a level playing field. That's all they're asking for. So will the government bring forward a debate in their time and set out in detail the support that they claim to be giving to the domestic diagnostics industry?
Mr. Speaker, the purpose of business questions is to ensure that members have the opportunity to raise issues in debate that they wish to. The honourable gentleman tells me that he's had the chance to question the Prime Minister and the Paymaster General on exactly this question. Now, the fact he doesn't like the answers does not mean that the answers have not been given and that satisfactory Parliament time has been spent on the issue.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Wolverhampton, I'm working hard with key partners to secure all the funding for the Wolverhampton City Learning Quarter. What we need is still some of that funding to come through, and we're delighted with what we've received so far. So will the leader set out in government time debate to ensure that all Wolverhampton children can have the right start in life by setting up the City Learning Quarter?
Leader.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and may I commend him for the brilliant work he is doing on behalf of his constituents in Wolverhampton. And as I understand it, the City Quarter is a most impressive project supporting the Council objectives to boost adult learning in the area with its new facilities. The government appreciates the importance of adult education in improving people's life chances, so this project supports our wider aims to boost adult learning and reskilling, which we are doing through the Adult Education Budget, Skills Bootcamp and Level 3 free course for jobs offers funded by the new National Skills Fund. We are spending taxpayers' money in education across the country to give every child the best start in life and targeting to support to the most disadvantaged so no one is left behind. Now, my honourable friend is asking when the money is coming. He is absolutely right to ask that question, and I will make sure that he gets an answer from the department as to when it will arrive, when the cheque will be cleared.
Emma Lumba.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents and many others have been incorrectly subjected to large fines incurred debt and are being chased by bailiffs for alleged non-payment of the toll at our Tyne tunnel since it changed to an open road system. Last year, I wrote to the Secretary of State for Transport and was advised that these problems had nothing at all to do with the government. Yet some of these issues relate to bylaws that can only be changed by statutory instruments. Can the Leader of the House please explain if, as the Secretary of State indicated, the government is no longer responsible for changing this legislation, then who is?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I have enormous sympathy for the issue that she is raising. There is nothing more vexatious for our constituents than being fined by officious bodies for doing things that are perfectly normal to do, and whether they are rogue private parking companies who seem to specialise in this, or people chasing for tolls, it is something that she's quite right to stand up for her constituents on behalf of. I think it would be most helpful if she would set out to me in writing precisely what bylaws need changing, and then I can take that up with the relevant department.
Christopher Chell.
Speaker, can we have an early debate on the operational, shall I say, the lack of operation of the vaccine damage payments scheme? Because in the year in which it's been operating, not a single payment has been made in respect of any victim of COVID-19 vaccine. And we know from recent inquests and from other detailed material from professors at Bristol University of the link between damage caused by vaccines and the need for compensation for those people who are in that unfortunate minority of having so suffered. Is this not fundamental to improving vaccine confidence?
Leader. Mr. Speaker, there should be huge vaccine confidence. What has happened with the vaccine programme, the booster programme, has meant that this country has been able to get back to normal faster than almost any other country in the world. And my right honourable friend and I particularly note that it is thanks to the fact that we're not in the European Union that we were able to move so quickly. So I would encourage my right honourable friend to indicate his own confidence in the vaccine, support the vaccine rollout, because that really has been essential to our economic reopening, to the health of the nation, and to the ability of the NHS to cope with COVID. Of course, everything else will be looked at in due course, but the success of the programme is fundamental.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you and to everybody across the House. Before Christmas, Virgin Care, which had contracts to deliver a number of NHS services, was taken over by a private equity firm called 2020 Capital. Yet we know little about the company's priorities or strategic approach to delivering services, other than the statement on their website which says that they look for significant returns within 2 to 5 years. That will sound alarm bells for people working for them. What's more, the Health and Care Bill will allow integrated care boards to delegate functions and even devolve budgets to non-statutory bodies, which could include private equity firms such as this. This has huge implications for patients and staff. So, will the Leader of the House provide government time for a debate on the impact of the government's NHS privatisation agenda, and will he ask the Prime Minister to come to this House and be straight with people in England and explain to them that he is in fact dismantling the National Health Service as a public service and handing it gift-wrapped to big business?
Leader.
I'm afraid the heckle from the back answered the question.
William Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last June, my honourable friend, the member for Dewsbury, and I submitted a bid to the Levelling Up Fund to upgrade the Penistone line. This would result in much-needed improvements in train services between Huddersfield and Sheffield, and double the number of trains serving stations in my constituency like Penistone, Dodworth and Chapeltown. So my constituents desperately need these improvements to travel to work and leisure and college. So can my right honourable friend provide an update as to when we might hear if our bid has been successful?
Leader.
I thank my honourable friend for her question and for the terrific efforts she is making in supporting efforts to level up and to back her constituency. I understand from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities that a letter detailing the outcome of Kirklees Council's application to upgrade the Penistone line was sent to the Council in October, and I will therefore ask my honourable friend to, I will ask my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, to speak to my honourable friend. I must warn members of the House that not every Levelling Up Fund application is successful, but that I would say, as I said to an honourable lady opposite, do keep on persevering.
Gavin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Like many members, perhaps including the leader himself. I've had many constituency cases hit by increasing delays, including state pension payments commencing, DVLA processing, applications in various Home Office delays, but new figures would suggest that the reason, in large part at least, is a slashing over 6,000 civil service jobs in the last decade, whilst the proportion of civil servants at the highest grades have nearly doubled. So can we have a debate on better support for overstretched civil service operating at the coalface?
I thank the honourable gentleman, who I normally find myself in these sessions trying to be as helpful as I can to. I'm afraid I have a slightly different view as to why things haven't been working, and I think a lot of the delays have been caused by problems with working from home, which is why it's so important that those who need to go into the office to work do so.
Listed then.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Mayor of London is proposing to sell the Notting Hill police station to the highest bidder. This will mean that there will be no physical police presence in the north of my borough. I have been working with my council and local community groups, including the Kensington Society, to put together a bid for community uses which could partially include a police station. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is completely wrong that the Mayor of London is selling a police station in London and in North Kensington? But if he persists in this wrong action, he should prioritise the bid from a community group.
I think a sentence that involves the Mayor of London and wrong action is almost by definition tautologous. That his failures are manifest and come out at this session week after week, particularly in relation to crime. And it does seem strange that with crime rising, that police stations are still being sold off. So I encourage my honourable friend in her advocacy of an alternative consortium which may be able to keep space for the police. And I would reiterate the points I made about our right honourable friend the Prime Minister, because when he was Mayor of London, crime fell by 23%, and that was a triumph of leadership, and London needs better leadership.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if the Leader of the House has had a chance to read today's New Musical Express yet, but in it there's a long article which sets out the continuing problems 12 months on after Brexit for touring artists wanting to work across the European Union visa-free and without unnecessary costs and bureaucracy. The CEO of the Featured Artists Coalition said in that article, all the information that they've got, he said, we had to get it from multiple sources, but none of them were the government. Now that the major obstacles out the way with Lord Frost's welcome departure, can we have a debate about focusing on solving this problem once and for all?
Leader? I must disagree with the honourable gentleman about my noble friend, the Lord Frost, the most distinguished figure and servant of this government and of the nation. But the honourable gentleman knows that these matters are being discussed between Her Majesty's Government and individual member states of the European Union who have responsibility for it. Considerable progress, as I think the honourable gentleman acknowledges, has been made, with a number of countries being very willing to have reciprocal arrangements. But may I confess, Mr. Speaker, that I have failed in that I have not read the New Musical Express this morning, or indeed on any morning that I can ever recall.
Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Environment Agency are now formally investigating alleged criminal activity at Wally's Quarry landfill in my constituency of Newcastle-under-Lyme. Now, that landfill is ultimately owned by Red Industries, a company controlled by Mr. Adam Sher, who was convicted and sent to jail in the past for bugging the Environment Agency over another landfill. I also note the recent media reports about illegal fly tipping, as referred to by my honourable friend earlier, and rogue waste dealers. Indeed, one journalist had successfully registered his dead goldfish as a waste dealer with the Environment Agency. So could we please have a debate on the regulation of and the criminality within Britain's waste industry?
Leader. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising these really appalling crimes and absurd ones. I mean, how could somebody register a goldfish as a waste dealer? The government is preparing significant reforms to continue to increase the pressure on illegal waste operators. Our planned electronic waste tracking reforms will make it harder to misidentify waste or dispose of it unsuitably. Our planned changes to the carriers, brokers and dealers licensing regime will improve licensing and make it harder still for rogue operators to escape detection. But I suppose it is to some extent reassuring to my honourable friend and to me that the gentleman he referred to has been found guilty and convicted and sent to jail, so that sometimes the law does take its course in all its majesty.
Rachel Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 8.5 million people entered this year in debt, and with 1 in 6 people now struggling to pay bills, escalating food, fuel and housing costs are meaning that this situation is getting more and more acute. In York, we've launched a York Poverty Truth Commission to start addressing the issues, but we know a lot of the solutions lie in this House. So can we have an urgent debate about the impact of poverty and the solutions that need to be brought urgently forward?
I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if I may divide the question into two parts. The one on providing support for people in debt and the other on what the government and taxpayers are doing to support people in poverty. Because I think the two questions, though related, are not identical. And that some people get into a spiral of debt for which there are very good organisations in all our constituencies that help and do amazingly good work with, and that we should all, as individual MPs, try to point our constituents in the right direction to get help, which can often very significantly reduce interest rates and repayments simply by entering into a conversation with the lenders. But as regards what the government has been doing with poverty, the government is aware of the difficulties, and there is £4.2 billion of support available. Raising the national living wage to £9.50 next year will help. Giving nearly 2 million families an extra £1,000 a year through the cut to the universal taper credit and increase to work allowances will also be important. Both of these things will help work pay, and work is unquestionably the best way out of poverty. There are a number of other schemes, but time is pressing, Mr. Speaker, so unless I get another question, I will not go into them all now.
Kruger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend may be aware of research that was published on the 23rd of December in the British Medical Journal, just after we all voted for Plan B, that suggests that a triple dose of the vaccines, 3 months after the third dose, offers pretty much zero protection against transmission of the Omicron variant. I hope my right honourable friend agrees with me that it would be unthinkable to insist that NHS workers should have a jab every 3 months by law. And so if this research is accepted by government, will he make time for this House to repeal the compulsory vaccination of health workers before it comes into effect on the 1st of April, thereby saving the NHS tens of thousands of staff and restoring the principle that in this country at least, vaccination is the free choice of a free people?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, my reading material wasn't the NME nor the BMJ. If somebody asks me about the Spectator, I may be able to give a more positive answer. This is a very difficult issue that my honourable friend raises. We are a free country, and it is important that we maintain essential liberties, and that enforced medication has been extraordinarily rare. There were examples of compulsory smallpox vaccination in the 19th century. The government is absolutely of the view, and this is a view held much more broadly than simply by members of Her Majesty's government, that vaccination is our best defence against COVID. Vaccination reduces the likelihood of infection and therefore helps break chains of transmission and is safe and effective. Any increase in immunity of workers from vaccination will reduce risk of harm to patients and service users, as well as our valuable health and social care workforce. So therefore, I'm sorry to disappoint my honourable friend, but Her Majesty's government does not agree that the regulations on vaccine of health and care workers should be revoked.
Chris Brown.
Happy Epiphany, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that the Leader of the House has many epiphanies. Can we have a debate on drug and alcohol services in the country? Partly so that we could celebrate the amazing work that is done by the clinicians in those services, often in very difficult circumstances. Also so that we might be able to encourage more people to take up that profession, because there's a massive shortage across the whole of the country in clinicians. But perhaps even more importantly, because I suspect every single one of us knows somebody who might have been affected by these services, to celebrate those extraordinary people who maybe had a problem with drug and alcohol, but have absolutely managed to turn their lives around. Shouldn't we celebrate them?
Leader.
In a spirit of goodwill on Epiphany, may I say how much I agree with the honourable gentleman. I can't promise him a debate, but we should certainly celebrate the people who either through their own actions recover from a dependency or help others to recover from a dependency. I am a great believer that people have a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance, and everything that can be done by parts of the state or by voluntary bodies to do that is worth celebrating. And I'm glad to see that the Chairman of the Backbench Business Committee is still in his place, and that the honourable gentleman has asked once and been successful, and if we're continuing on a biblical theme, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find.
Mark Eastwood.
Yeah. Since being elected, I have met a large number of parents and community organisations, including West Yorkshire ADHD Support Group, asking for my help with improving special education needs provision in our schools. Following these discussions and after much research, it is apparent that some schools offer far better SEN provision than others. This disparity should not exist. Therefore, could I ask my right honourable friend for a debate on SEN provision in our education system to ensure that all children, regardless of need, are provided with the same opportunities in life?
Leader.
This is so important, so I'm grateful to my honourable friend. The recent spending review makes available £2.6 billion of new funding across the next 3 years for new school places for children with special educational needs and disabilities. This represents a transformational expenditure of taxpayers' money in new high-needs provision and will help deliver tens of thousands of new places. So I think what my honourable friend is asking for is actually happening, but I will make sure his comments are passed on to my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary.
Diana Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot this morning about what the Leader of the House doesn't read. I hope that he's reading the Health and Social Care Committee report on the challenges facing the NHS workforce, which has just been published. And I think more than ever this week, we recognise the challenges that the NHS workforce and social care workforce are facing with the Omicron surge, with the backlog in treatment and with them already being exhausted. So isn't this an ideal opportunity for the government to take up my idea of an NHS and social care covenant, just as we have for the armed forces and the police, to recognise society's responsibilities and obligations to this important part of our social infrastructure in this country?
Leader.
Well, I think it is an opportunity, and I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for making her point, to thank people working in the health service and in social care for the work that they do, particularly in the winter when it is very difficult. And the Honourable Lady, the member for Bath, raised this in relation to the RUH in my own constituency. But I think if we went round this chamber, every single member could stand up and give a tribute to their local hospitals, local GP surgeries, and those who work above and beyond the call of duty, particularly at this time of year. And I note for Hansard benefit, because they can't see, that even Mr. Speaker is nodding, and I know he ran a great campaign for his own local hospital, which was ultimately successful. So I think what the Honourable Lady Right Honourable Lady says is important, that we recognise the contribution made. Whether a covenant is the answer is, I think, something that we will need to discuss more, but I think our idea is certainly one that is worth considering.
Dr. Luca.
Mr. Speaker. Could we have a debate on the importance of the A5 to the UK? This road runs from London to Wales and is so important, particularly to joining the East and West Midlands. It's blighted by narrowings and, most importantly, one of the most bashed bridges in Britain, right by Hinckley, where I am. There's a decision point coming in RIS 3 in March. Would it be possible to have a debate before then to say how important this House feels the A5 is?
Leader.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. And isn't it that's not a promise of a debate, but am I not right in thinking that the A5 goes along one of the old Roman roads, and therefore it has been important to our history for generation upon generation? And where I think my honourable friend is saying something of the greatest relevance is that we need to consider our roads as a united kingdom, because they don't conveniently stop when you get to the boundary between counties or indeed even between the constituent parts of our great kingdom. So I think he's right to call for a debate, but I would suggest on a specific road, even one as important and as ancient as the A5, it's probably most suitable for an adjournment debate.
Thank you. Dave Dugan.
Mr Speaker, I know that the leader likes nothing more than to elicit a response from a minister that an honourable member has previously failed to do. So he'll be alarmed to know that yesterday both the honourable member for Stirling and myself asked the Secretary of State for International Trade how, when and why she would seek to deploy the Internal Market Act to ride roughshod over devolution. But she refused. Could he get an answer for us, please?
Leader.
I can give an answer very directly that Her Majesty's Government has no intention of riding roughshod over the devolved settlement.
Nick Yake.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and Happy New Year. When I met with the National Deaf Children's Society recently, they outlined the challenges that many deaf children have had to deal with during the pandemic. It is these children, as well as Rose Ayling-Ellis, who won Strictly Come Dancing last month, who have inspired me to learn British Sign Language as my New Year's resolution. Mr Speaker, I would like to know if the Leader of the House would like to join me, but if not, because time probably doesn't allow, what his New Year's resolution is.
We'd all like to know.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. I'm afraid I've never been very good at learning languages. Even English I only just about managed to get by with. No, I'm afraid my Latin is absolutely hopeless. So I think my New Year's resolution, Mr Speaker, in support of my honourable friend, should be to campaign more in Westminster for the local elections that are coming up in May, because it has to be said the council she used to lead with such distinction is one of the great Conservative councils in the country, that it keeps the council tax down, it keeps good services running, it is a model of its kind. We even managed to hold it in 1990, and I can assure her that I have forgiven the council for the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits.
Weston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I ask the Leader of the House for a debate on the merger of councils and local democracy? I'm sure he'd be concerned if there was suddenly an announcement that Somerset and Bristol were to merge. In Warwickshire, the Conservative-controlled county council is arguing for a unitary authority. Meanwhile, we have Stratford and Warwick district councils voting to merge themselves, but without any public vote in this. Surely we should be putting these sorts of decisions to the people, as I'm sure my example earlier would have demonstrated to him.
The honourable gentleman knows my weaknesses only too well, because this dreadful idea was tried with the County of Avon, which was abolished, I'm glad to say, to general rejoicing in 1996, and they've sort of half tried it again with the West of England Combined Authority, which had no support beyond bureaucrats in my own area. None of the people of North East Somerset wanted it, so I have a great deal of sympathy with what the honourable gentleman is asking for, but any change in council status usually requires a statutory instrument, and therefore there are ways of ensuring that those are discussed.
Statues and monuments located in the public realm are an important part of our cultural heritage. Can we have a statement from the Leader of the House and the relevant government departments that the ongoing presence of these statues and monuments, their reappraisal or their removal, needs to be determined by lawful means and not by mob rule? And if the government doesn't make this clear, those monuments that some people don't like, as a result of the recent court case in Bristol, are now at greater risk of defacement, destruction or removal.
Well, I don't think the result in Bristol does do that, because the decision does not set a precedent. It was the case decided by a jury on the facts before them. So I shall not be going out of here immediately afterwards and drawing the moustache on the statue of Oliver Cromwell outside, much though I am opposed to regicides in principle and think that they deserve to be removed from pedestals, broadly speaking, because I think we should recognise our history, even when the figures in those history are not ones that we individually admire, that our island story is a complex one, and there are varieties in all people of their good intentions and their less pure intentions. So I think he is right that we should protect monuments, right that they should only be removed by a due process, but one of our greatest monuments is the jury system, which is the great, sublime protector of our liberties.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to funding from the Mayor of London, Hounslow Council will be buying over 500 homes and bringing them into council ownership, including a number of former council homes sold under right to buy. These will provide secure, affordable homes to over 500 families in housing need, 25 going to young care leavers and 20 going to Afghan refugees to whom this country owes a debt. Will the Leader of the House congratulate the Mayor of London and London Borough of Hounslow and find time for a debate on the importance of public investment in truly affordable and secure housing?
Mr. Speaker, I would first of all say the Mayor of London has no money. It's taxpayers' money, and the Honourable Lady needs the conversion that has worked on the Honourable Lady, the Shadow Leader. It is, of course, important to have affordable housing. The government is increasing the supply of housing. £10 billion is being spent in housing supply since the start of this Parliament, which will unlock over 1 million homes, including £300 million of locally led grant funding to unlock small brownfield sites and improve communities, and a £12 billion expenditure in affordable housing from 2021. So these things are happening. They are led by central government, but it's taxpayers' money.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, my question has actually been asked, so I was actually going to duck out, but I thought I'd just, ask it anyway. So again, I also, as somebody who has concerns about this country's heritage, I also was disturbed by this judgment. I think the key point here is it's fair enough to feel strongly about that particular statute, but there are legal and democratic processes one can engage with to make the case that that statute should be taken down. So this really, from what I can see, was lawlessness. And I do think it could set a dangerous precedent. So will my right honourable friend assure me that the government will consider, if any changes can be made, to protect our heritage, they are made, because I think you would have seen in the media today there is great concern, and I don't think it's all misplaced. Thank you very much.
Leader.
I'm going to refer back to the jury system in, I hope, some reassurance to my honourable friend, because it is an ancient right, it is a great protector of freedom, but that doesn't mean that every decision made by every jury is one that is welcomed by some people in some circumstances, but that it is such an important protector of our liberties that we must take the rough with the smooth.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 18th of March, my private member's bill on statutory paid bereavement leave for all who lose a close family member, building on the excellent parental leave and pay bill which came into effect in 2020, will be before this House. Estimates show that grief costs the UK economy £23 billion per year and the Treasury £8 billion in lost revenues. Indeed, without the space to grieve, some drop out of the workforce altogether. But statutory paid right for all workers to have the time to grieve will produce a more productive and resilient workforce with a greater sense of well-being. So will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out whether he will support my statutory paid bereavement leave bill for all, as many across the House already do?
Leader.
May I thank the Honourable Lady for the approach that she is taking to this. I can't give off-the-cuff commitments to private members' bills on Thursday mornings, but I think I can say that the way members get those bills adopted is by, as the Honourable Lady has done, courteously campaigning for them, building up a head steam of support, and some private members' bills that start off with remarkably little government support end up getting on the statute book because of the effectiveness of a backbench campaigner.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Leader of the House knows Doncaster has fantastic rail links and has a rich rail heritage. I'm sure he also knows it's the birthplace of both the Flying Scotsman and the Mallard. Therefore, does the right honourable gentleman agree with me that Doncaster is by far the best place for the headquarters of Great British Rail?
My honourable friend asks me to do something for which I do not have the authority, but I can say that Doncaster is a wonderful place and has a superb Member of Parliament who ensures that it is very well and effectively represented in this House. Now, as I understand it, the Great British Railways transition team will be running a competition to identify the national headquarters, which will be based outside of London, demonstrating the government's commitment to levelling up. I'm not immediately aware of any competition coming from North East Somerset, so may I wish Doncaster extremely well.
Jim Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just ask the Leader of the House this question? Would he consider providing time for a debate on the persecution of Christians in India? According to a very recent report by the United Christian Forum, 2021 was the most violent year for India's Christians, and the attackers continue their brutal targeting with impunity. Does the Leader of the House not agree that a debate on this topic would be timely, as this House should not continue to blindly implement the UK-India 2030 roadmap while neglecting India's human rights record as concerns freedom of religion or belief? Thank you.
Leader. As always, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman who campaigns tirelessly on this issue. I mean, India is a great friend of this country, an important and powerful ally, but I confess I was concerned to read that donations to the Mother Teresa Fund have been limited from overseas recently, as the work of Mother Teresa, and since her death by the organisations that she was involved with, has been really very important and done wonderful and good work. So I was sorry to read that, but our relationship with India is one of our most important foreign affairs relationships.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, Stroud midwives marched through the town as part of marches across the country that coordinated to raise awareness of pressures on midwifery and concerns about safety. There's also a petition with over 100,000 signatures, and I've met with Stroud midwives. Mr. Speaker, I actually came in today to ask for the leader's help to get a debate on this issue, but I've had a message from my team to say that such is the presence of the leader, I've just been granted a debate on the adjournment as an adjournment debate on the 17th. So I pivot to ask my right honourable friend to join me in praising midwives across the country and to encourage, leader of the House, to encourage people to join my debate.
There'll be confession time in a moment.
Mr. Speaker, it is, of course, Mr. Speaker who gives adjournment debates, and therefore we pay homage, Mr. Speaker, for your beneficence, your wisdom, and your perspicacity in realising that this was about to be asked for and giving it before it had even been requested formally on the floor of the House. But may I say to my honourable friend that as the father of 6 children, I hold midwives in the highest regard.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Blackpool residents are extremely concerned about increases in the cost of living and the likelihood of large rises in their fuel bills from the spring. Scrapping VAT and the green levies on fuel bills would go a long way towards easing the pressures on the household budget. And so will my right honourable friend look to hold a debate in government time on how we can mitigate these costs being passed on to consumers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have already discussed the VAT issue and the difficult decisions any Chancellor always has to make in deciding where taxation falls to ensure that what the country wishes to afford can be paid for. But there is targeted support for those being hit most, such as the £500 million Household Support Fund and the Warm Homes discount. So the government is very conscious, and I already mentioned the £4.2 billion that is being spent to help people suffering from the rising cost of living. So the government is very conscious of this, but my honourable friend is a very effective campaigner, and I'm sure this is not the last we will hear of this important issue.
We now come to Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, more than 28,000 people left the safe haven of France and arrived illegally in the UK by small boat. Will the government consider declaring this crisis in the Channel as a national emergency? And in addition to the Nationality and Borders Bill currently in the House of Lords, will they consider introducing emergency legislation so that in 2022 we are able to control our borders, no more lives are needlessly lost at sea, and the criminals profiteering on the backs of human misery are brought to justice?
I wonder how often, Mr. Speaker, France has been called safe in this particular chamber over the centuries, but I think we can accept that it is safe for most refugees, except for those who don't like garlic, who may need to escape. But what has been going on in the Channel is appalling and is something that should concern us all, because it is led by people smugglers, it is led by evil people, and it has led to deaths. And we need to protect further lives from this dangerous crossing and break the business model of the criminal gangs who exploit desperation. Since the Joint Intelligence Centre was established in July 2020, we have with France dismantled 17 small boat organised crime groups and secured over 400 arrests. UK immigration enforcement has secured 67 convictions for the criminals driving small boat crossings since January 2020, resulting in sentences totalling over 54 years. Our Nationality and Borders Bill will give us more powers, including being able to do things like check people's age, so that we know the facts that we're getting when people claim asylum, which should make our system firmer and fairer.
That's the end of business questions. We're now coming to the statement. We have the Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss, Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, before I start, I'd like to welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman to his new role, and also my honourable friend to his new position as Minister for Europe. I want to update the House on what we are doing to tackle Russia's aggression towards Ukraine. In December, I set out how we, together with our allies, will build a network of liberty to ensure democracy doesn't just survive, it thrives. And of course, as a free democratic country in Europe, Ukraine is a crucial priority. 30 years ago, Britain was one of the first countries to recognise Ukraine's independence. And today, our commitment to Ukraine is unwavering. We stand with our friend against hostile actors, and we will defend democracy at the frontier of freedom in Eastern Europe and around the world. Britain and its allies made this clear at NATO in November and at the G7, which I hosted in Liverpool last month. Any Russian military incursion into Ukraine would be a massive strategic mistake and would come at a severe cost. We will not accept the campaign Russia is waging to subvert its democratic neighbours. It is accompanied by baseless rhetoric and disinformation. They have falsely cast Ukraine as a threat to justify their aggressive stance. They falsely accuse NATO of provocation. This could not be further from the truth. Ukraine's restraint has been commendable, and NATO has always been a defensive alliance. Russia is the aggressor here. They have massed a huge number of troops along the Ukrainian border and in illegally annexed Crimea. There is no justification whatsoever for Russia's bellicose stance towards Ukraine. It is unprovoked, and it is part of a wider pattern of behaviour by the Kremlin, reliant on disinformation and mistrust to seek to gain an upper hand. Moscow has long run a campaign to subvert freedom and democracy in Ukraine, from the invasion of 2014 to cyber attacks, disinformation and the weaponization of energy supplies. At the same time, they are backing the repressive actions of the Lukashenko regime in Belarus, sowing the seeds of discord in the Western Balkans and threatening our friends in the Baltics. I urge Russia to end its malign activity and to stick to what has been agreed. That means the 1975 Helsinki Final Act, where Russia signed up to dispute resolution by dialogue rather than by force. It means the 1994 Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, where Russia agreed to uphold Ukraine's territorial integrity. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for this security guarantee. And it means the 2014 Minsk Protocol, where all parties agreed to a ceasefire in the Donbass region. These agreements, based on the principles of freedom, democracy and the rule of law, must be upheld. The free world must rise to meet this moment. Britain is stepping up and leading by example. I have spoken out against Russian aggression at the OSCE and NATO and bilaterally with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Last month, I chaired a meeting of the G7 foreign ministers in Liverpool. We called on Russia to de-escalate, pursue diplomatic channels, and abide by its commitments on the transparency of military activities. We made clear that any further military incursion into Ukraine would bring massive consequences, including coordinated sanctions to impose a severe cost on Russia's interest and economy. The UK is working with our partners on these sanctions, including high-impact measures targeting the Russian financial sector and individuals. We're also providing crucial economic and security support to Ukraine. I'm working closely with Foreign Minister Kuleba. I spoke to him on Tuesday, and last month I welcomed him to London for high-level talks. We're helping Ukraine strengthen its defences with joint exercises, maritime support, and by training over 20,000 members of its army, with more to come. We're ramping up support for trade in priority areas like technology and clean energy to £3.5 billion, and this includes £1.7 billion to boost Ukraine's naval capability. I look forward to visiting Kiev later this month. We're also supporting stability in the Western Balkans, where the Prime Minister has appointed Sir Stuart Peach as Special Envoy. And in Belarus, we were the first European country to put sanctions on the Lukashenko regime, and we were the first to send engineers to assist Poland. This next week, Mr. Speaker, will be absolutely critical for peace and security in Europe. Tomorrow, I will join an extraordinary meeting of NATO foreign ministers. The US-Russia dialogue begins on Sunday, followed by the NATO-Russia Council on Wednesday and the OSCE Permanent Council on Thursday. We will be in talks on the basis of freedom, democracy and the rule of law. It's vital that NATO is united in pushing back against Russia's threatening behaviour. And together, we must hold Russia to its long-standing obligations. There can be no rewards for aggression. Finally, Europe must reduce its dependence on Russian gas. Britain remains opposed to Nord Stream 2, and I'm working with allies and partners to highlight the strategic risks of this project. We are reaching a crucial moment. The only way forward is for Russia to de-escalate and pursue a path of diplomacy. We will continue to stand together with our allies, steadfast in support of Ukraine and its future as a free and sovereign democracy. I commend this statement to the House.
I now call on the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lamb.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for her warm words as I take up this post. I'm grateful for advance sight of the statement, and I'm grateful for the briefing that she has given me on Privy Council terms. Let me begin by saying that on this side of the House there is absolutely no doubt about the threat posed by the current Russian regime, both to our own national security, that of our allies, and to countries in the region. It is Russia's actions that are driving this dangerous escalation of tensions. We face a moment of acute danger with over 100,000 troops massed on the border and alarming rhetoric and unreasonable demands emerging from the Kremlin. We know that Putin is not afraid to act to undermine Ukraine's integrity, overtly or covertly. The situation remains fraught with risk. It is right that this whole House sends a clear and unified message today that we fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that Russian action to further undermine this will be met with severe consequences. We must be crystal clear in our commitment to NATO and to the security of our allies. That commitment must be unshakable. It is also right that we support dialogue to achieve de-escalation, consistent with the security of our NATO allies and the integrity of Ukraine. We welcome the crucial ongoing diplomatic efforts from President Biden and the Secretary General Stoltenberg and others. Can I ask her for the following? It is important that Ukraine is fully engaged in these diplomatic processes. I understand that she spoke to her counterpart. Has the Prime Minister spoken to President Zelensky? Does she agree that Russia's proposed treaties make unreasonable demands and are completely incompatible with the sovereignty of NATO allies and the independence of Ukraine? Mr. Speaker, these developments remind us about the importance of security in our own backyard in Europe. Can I ask what consultations she has had with European partners and with the European Union itself, which will be crucial to the strength of any sanctions regime and ending dependence on Russian gas. She spoke of severe consequences, economic consequences for Russia should it act against Ukraine. But we all know that the ongoing role the UK plays in international money laundering and illicit finance is important in that regard. For too long, our country has been a soft touch for corrupt elites that help sustain the Putin regime. Can she commit to a renewed effort to tackle this threat and finally implement the Russia report? Finally, can I ask her about her assessment of developments in Kazakhstan, not least because we've seen reports of deaths in the last 2 hours. For too long, Kazakhstan's government has been unaccountable to its people. Does she agree with me that the people of Kazakhstan have the right to choose their own government without interference or intimidation from their own government or outside forces, and that it would be deeply troubling to see another example of Russian-backed forces overtly or covertly seeking to quell democratic movements in other independent countries with scant regard for human rights?
Secretary.
Well, first of all, can I welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman's support and that of the opposition to Ukraine and the importance of maintaining Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and democracy. And I do look forward to working with the Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues to show the strong support of the United Kingdom House of Commons in this important, at this important time. That is very welcome. I can confirm the Prime Minister has spoken to President Zelensky. I'm in regular touch with Minister Kuleba, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, and in fact I met him at the NATO summit last year, as well as when he visited in December, and I'll be shortly travelling to Ukraine as well. I also agree with the Honourable Gentleman, or the Right Honourable Gentleman, on the subject of Moscow's completely unreasonable demands. I am absolutely clear that in the face of this aggression, we should not see any concessions made. The important thing is that we make sure that Moscow is following the commitments it has made in agreements, namely the 1994 Budapest Agreement. In exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, it was agreed that Russia would stand behind Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that must be upheld, and Moscow must be held to account. The Honourable Gentleman asked me about working with the EU and other partners. I've had a call with Josep Borrell over the Christmas period. He, of course, was at the G7, and the UK coordinated a G7 statement making it very clear that all of the G7 backs the stance that is being taken. I've also had a number of calls with other European counterparts, including Anna Linda, who was chairing the OSCE. It's now passed over to Minister Rao, and I will also shortly be visiting Poland. So the UK is very engaged, and all of our allies stand together in repudiating the disinformation that we are seeing coming from Moscow, and we stand together in backing Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Right Honourable Gentleman asked me about Kazakhstan. We are concerned by the violent clashes in Kazakhstan, and we're following developments very closely. Our thoughts are with those who have lost their lives in what has happened, and we condemn the acts of violence and destruction of property in Almaty. And we will be coordinating further with our allies on what further steps we should take.
Foreign Affairs Select Committee Chair Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the statement that my right honourable friend has made today. Her very clear statement that this country, this government, stands against the Russian aggression that we're seeing, not just in Ukraine, but actually also in Georgia, against some of the Baltic nations, and via Belarus, against countries like Poland, Latvia and Lithuania, by using migration as a weapon against free people. May I ask my right honourable friend, amongst the conversations that she has had, and I welcome those that she's already listed, has she spoken to our German and our French colleagues about training teams in Ukraine? Has she spoken to those who are part of the Normandy process about having a British representative as part of it? And has she also spoken to Secretary General Stoltenberg about the fact that we all recognise, but needs to be stated more clearly, that NATO is a free association of free people defending freedom? It is not an aggressive alliance, it's a defensive alliance. There was no agreement by any party or any nation to prevent any free people from joining the NATO Defensive Pact in 1991 or indeed at any time. And President Putin, let me be quite clear on this, is lying when he says that there was. It is not true. Would she please, therefore, work with other NATO partners to make sure that free countries and free peoples who wish to guarantee that freedom through a defensive alliance can do so as part of NATO, whether they are threatened by Russia today or, like Sweden and Finland, have been threatened in the past?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his points. I have been working closely with my French and German counterparts to tackle this issue, and tomorrow we have a virtual meeting of the NATO foreign ministers when again we will be coordinating ahead of the meetings next week, namely the meetings between Russia and the United States, but also the Russia-NATO meeting. And we are all very, very clear that NATO is a defensive alliance. It is a sovereign decision for NATO and relevant applicant states as to whether they join NATO. It is not a decision for Russia. They have no auspices over it whatsoever. And my honourable friend is absolutely right to point out the disinformation that is being coming from the Kremlin on this subject. And there will be a very strong statement by Jens Stoltenberg, who I have also been coordinating with, about NATO, the purpose of NATO, and reaffirming the fact that NATO is a defensive alliance supporting the countries within NATO.
SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you and to the colleagues across the House. I'm grateful for sight also of the Foreign Secretary's statement, and I do welcome it as far as it goes. And I have to say, in a constructive spirit, I don't really find much actually new in the statement today, though I do welcome the fact that we're having this discussion, because the actions of the Russian government are concerning. There's a pattern of behaviour in the Baltic states, the Balkans, Central Asia, Belarus, manipulation of energy markets and disinformation. And on Ukraine especially, the SNP will be part of the coalition to defend Ukraine and international law. She has our support on that. So I'd urge her to go a bit further. She mentions financial consequences to a continued incursion into Ukraine. Can she confirm today that the suspension of Russia from the SWIFT payment system is on the table and will be a consequence? Because that would be a top-level sanction which would take effect and have an influence. And in a constructive spirit, and I've already said the SNP supports her efforts, can I urge her to take serious heed to what was said by the Labour spokesperson on this about the implementation of the Russia report? Because her own credibility in the eyes of Moscow is surely weakened by the fact that so many of members of her own party are in hock to dirty Russian money. There are members of the House of Lords who simply should not be there, having bought their places in the legislature of these islands. The Intelligence and Security Committee raised serious concerns about the extent to which dirty money is influencing UK politics. Integrity starts at home, and there's a lot of things that we should be doing to strengthen her own credibility, and she'll have the SNP's support in that as well.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been clear that Russian military aggression will be met with strength, including massive economic consequences through coordinated economic sanctions by allies and partners targeting Russian financial transactions and individuals, but I can't speculate on future sanctions. In July 2020, the UK used its global human rights sanction regime to impose sanctions on 25 Russian nationals responsible for appalling human rights violations. And we've shown we are absolutely ready to use those types of sanctions where it is appropriate. On the subject of the ISC report, we published our response immediately on the publication of the ISC report, and since then we've introduced a new autonomous cyber sanctions regime. We've set out a national cyber security strategy, and we have announced new legislation to provide security services and law enforcement with additional tools to tackle evolving state threats.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I certainly welcome this statement here today, but bigger picture, I don't believe the West has a coherent strategy to deal with Russia's increasing aggression. Sanctions won't deter Russia, and Ukraine remains hugely exposed. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary that with the West looking ever timid, ever divided, and ever risk-averse, with the United States looking ever distracted because of domestic issues, and NATO bruised after its retreat from Afghanistan, has there ever been a better time for Russia to invade Ukraine than in the forthcoming new year of the Orthodox calendar?
Well, I'd say in response to my honourable friend's point, we have been united with our partners, not just in the West, but in the free world. The G7 put out a very strong statement after Liverpool, being clear that there would be severe costs and massive consequences in the event of military aggression against Ukraine. And that was followed by an announcement at the December European Council meeting, which also made those same points. So we have seen a united front from allies around the free world, because this issue is, of course, vitally important about freedom, democracy and security within Europe. But my honourable friend does make the right point that this will be watched by aggressors around the world. This is not just about Europe, important though that is. This is about the signal we send to the rest of the world about what we do in the face of aggression. And that is why we have seen partners like Japan also sign up to that statement, and that is why we are working more broadly with partners across the world to challenge this aggression and to make sure there are no rewards for this type of aggressive behaviour.
Ms Bryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wholeheartedly agree that we have to stand foursquare with Ukraine. We also have to see off every, and there are many different kinds, but every kind of aggression that comes from the Putin regime in Russia. But what I don't understand is why the government has spent so long trying to bring in the cleaning up of the banking system in this country to make sure that we have a fully public beneficial register of beneficial ownership, not just of companies, but also of property and of trusts. One exists, but it's still not public. Why we still haven't made all the overseas territories, where lots of Russian money is presently hidden, have public registers of beneficial ownership of all of those three categories, and why government ministers still allow exemptions for some Russian oligarchs in the register of beneficial ownership of companies. I just don't understand. It seems entirely hypocritical.
Well, as I said, we do have a very tough anti-corruption regime, and we have used our global human rights sanctions regime to sanction people within Russia, including 25 Russian nationals. And of course, we continue to review this legislation.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the question of recommendations made by the ISC, may I welcome the steps taken by the House of Lords to clean up its act in relation to the registration of work undertaken for foreign governments. On the question of the NATO guarantee, does the Foreign Secretary agree that it is a solemn commitment to buy each member of NATO, if necessary, to go to war if any other member of NATO is attacked? Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and does she agree that it's important that we do not elide from the situation into Ukraine to the next step, which will be the Baltic states, which are members of NATO? We have to be very clear about what our commitments really are.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the NATO guarantee and the importance of that for NATO members, including the Baltic states. And in December, I visited British troops forming part of NATO's enhanced forward presence at Tapa in Estonia, where allies are helping protect the border with Russia, and we are working with our NATO partners to make sure that that protection remains in place and is enhanced so that we are able to fulfil our commitments. On the subject of Ukraine, what we are doing with Ukraine is making sure Ukraine has the capability to defend itself. So that is putting forward training. The UK has trained over 20,000 troops in Ukraine. We're also supplying extra capability for naval defences, as well as areas like support in cyber security and other services.
Kevin Jones.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement? She comes to the dispatch box and talks tough, which I agree with. But it's now 2 years since the ISC report. The Putin regime hasn't come to power by accident. It's come to power through the use of corruption and its involvement, which was spelt out in the ISC report, with enablers in this country and the West. The only recommendation that's been implemented is the House of Lords' recommendation in terms of Register of Interests of Lords with Russian companies. So can I ask her, like my honourable friend from the Rhondda, when will the government get tough and real, implement the recommendations from the Russia report? And can I just urge you, before she has lunch again with a Russian donor of the Conservative Party, can she just think and ask a question where that money came from originally?
Yeah.
As I've said, we have a very tough anti-corruption regime, and we have used it. And as a result of the work we are doing with our allies, we have been very clear that Russia would face massive consequences if there were to be an incursion into Ukraine.
John Howell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, I lead the delegation from the UK to the Council of Europe, where Russia is a member and where we have to deal with Russia on an almost daily basis. Will she join me in getting the Council of Europe to take a firm stand against Russia, because it is responsible for democracy and the rule of law across Europe?
Well, I certainly agree with my honourable friend, and it's important that the Council of Europe takes a strong stand on this issue.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. While Russia's actions undoubtedly represent a threat to its neighbours, as the Foreign Secretary has said, President Putin attempts to justify his unacceptable demands by claiming that somehow his country is threatened by NATO's defensive presence in countries like the Baltic states and Poland. In standing in solidarity with Ukraine, which the whole House does the Foreign Secretary think there are any steps that could be taken in the forthcoming talks to try and show to Russia that it faces no offensive strategic threat from NATO?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we don't buy into the false narrative that Putin has been peddling, that there is somehow some kind of security threat. You know, NATO has always been very clear it is a defensive alliance, responsible to defending the sovereignty and interests of its states. And Vladimir Putin is well aware of that. So I think it's very important we don't buy in to that false narrative. I do want to see progress made in talks, but they have to be on the basis of freedom and democracy, and they have to be on the basis of what Russia has committed to in the past. And it simply hasn't fulfilled those commitments, whether it's the commitments made in the Budapest Agreement, whether it's the commitments made in the Minsk agreements. Those commitments have not been fulfilled. So I see next week, and there is a series of crucial meetings next week, as making sure that Russia is holding firm to the commitments it has made.
Bob Seeley.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's great to hear a Foreign Secretary speaking with such clarity, so thank you. When it comes to our two allies, France and Germany, can I ask the following? Is she worried that Germany's appalling dependence on Russian energy undermines a clear and united Western approach? And when it comes to the Minsk and Normandy processes, is she worried that if we give in to Russia's demand for a highly federalized Ukrainian state, that will allow Russia to carve up and collapse the Ukrainian state over time, and it will simply be allowed to achieve its ends slowly rather than quickly?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that Europe needs to reduce its strategic dependence on Russian gas. And it's a broader issue about the dependence of freedom-loving democracies on economic support from autocracies that then makes it very difficult to make the political progress that we need to make in order to challenge Russian aggression. I've been very clear about our position on Nord Stream 2, and more broadly, we do need to reduce dependence on Russian gas. And on the subject of the discussions that are taking place in various formats, we cannot have a situation where Russian aggression is rewarded in any way. They have no auspices over Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we are very clear on that. And what we are working on, and what the foreign ministers' meeting that's taking place tomorrow is about making sure we are coordinating our positions across NATO, and we are very clear on those red lines.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary referenced in her statement her opposition to Nord Stream 2, but we do know that as Putin turns off the gas taps in Moscow, there is an impact here in the UK, where families are facing potentially a crippling 50% increase to their energy bills. But Gazprom is owned by the Russian state and has its international trading arm based in London. They're cashing in. They announced a £179 million dividend earlier this week. Now, today, Liberal Democrats have proposed a Robin Hood tax on the super profits of those oil and gas barons, with the money raised being used to support the poorest households. Now, having talked about not rewarding Russia for aggression, does the Foreign Secretary agree that this tax will not only help British families, but send a powerful message to Moscow that we can and will counteract Russian interference in our energy market?
It is clear that we need to reduce Europe's dependency on Russian gas. In fact, I think it's 3% of our gas is from Russia, but I agree with the Honourable Lady that it is desirable to reduce that. The way we need to reduce that dependency is more investment in areas like nuclear energy, which we're doing with small modular nuclear reactors, as well as more investment in areas like renewable, and making sure we're using alternative gas sources to supply our domestic energy needs.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some of us are sadly old enough to be able to remember Hungary in 1953 and the subsequent removal of Alexander Dubček in Czechoslovakia. More recently, the annexation of parts of Georgia, and then the invasion and annexation of Crimea. All with impunity, so far as the Soviet Union and the neo-Soviet Union are concerned. The free world simply failed to act. Further to the point raised by my honourable friend, the member for Henley, Russia and Ukraine are members of the Council of Europe. Will my right honourable friend use the platforms that are available to her within the Committee of Ministers and in person within the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to make it plain that the United Kingdom will not stand by any longer and simply talk, but we will act?
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend about using all platforms available, and also the fact that the free world does need to stand up against aggressors, and the UK has played a leading role in bringing together the G7 to make a very strong statement, as well as working with our NATO allies to make clear the basis of talks that are taking place next week. So we are very ready and willing to use our position to make the case for severe consequences should Russia seek to stage an incursion into Ukraine.
John Speller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the pressure on Ukraine at the moment is immediate, but it's part of a pattern of behaviour towards former Soviet satellites and Warsaw Pact countries, many of whom are now members of NATO and the EU, and most of them of both. And many of them whom also have, post-war, experienced Soviet tanks rolling in to crush protests, as we are seeing again in Kazakhstan. I think it's slightly concerning, quite frankly, that while the Shadow Defence Minister was here today for the statement, unfortunately I can't see anybody, unless I'm wrong, from the Ministry of Defence. So it's... can I ask then, when will the UK, in the discussions that are taking place next week, not be arguing only for tough talk, but also being prepared to provide material support to Ukraine to prevent an invasion or subversion?
Well, we are working very, very closely with the Ministry of Defence, and in fact, my colleague, the Defence Secretary, recently visited Ukraine. We have been providing support, including the training of troops, including intelligence and security assistance, and including helping Ukraine build its naval capability.
John Whittingdale.
My honourable friend has talked about massive consequences, including coordinated sanctions should there be further military incursion by Russia into Ukraine. But will she listen to the call of the Ukrainian ambassador that the behaviour of Russia, which she has outlined in her own statement, merits further measures being taken now? And will she consider that as during the course of her meetings next week?
Good.
My right honourable friend makes a very fair point about the appalling behaviour of Russia, including with respect to Ukraine, but also stirring up problems in the Balkans, as well as helping the Belarusian regime with their use of migration as an offensive weapon. And it's the point I was making earlier. You know, we need to make sure we're reducing economic dependency on Russia, and we're also strengthening the security ties with like-minded allies, including the Baltic states, so that we are able to repel these types of aggressive activities over the longer term. So we are working on that, as well as making sure that Russia understands the severe consequences of any action that they might take.
Dave Dugan.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I won't ask the Foreign Secretary to go into the detail of our coordinated sanction plans, because she's quite rightly not going to reveal those. But does she agree with me that in a state like Russia there's very little point in using economic sanctions to apply pain and suffering to the broader economy, which would then rely on a direct link to the ruling elite from a broader society, which I think we can agree doesn't really exist effectively in Russia? So that being the case, will she then confirm to the House that she's much more apt to apply these to the ruling elites around the world, the Russian elites in Manhattan, in London, in Paris, that have a direct link to the Kremlin, and if they're in pain, it will cause problems for the Russian ruling elite?
Well, I was clear in my statement that the coordinated economic sanctions by allies and partners are looking at Russian financial transactions and at individuals.
Stuart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I visited Bosnia twice in the last 8 months, and I have a deep and long-standing personal interest in what happens there. I am very concerned about reports of Russian involvement with Republika Srpska and their encouragement of a breakup of Bosnia. And in particular, there are some reports of the Russians providing weapons to Republika Srpska. Could I ask my right honourable friend to comment on that possibility?
It's vitally important that we don't see the hard-won peace and security, which my honourable friend did so much to help achieve in the Western Balkans, that we don't see it lost. That is vitally important. That's why I met the High Representative, and we are giving him our full support, Christian Schmidt. We've also appointed Sir Stuart Peach as our special envoy to the Western Balkans, and recently I hosted the Western Balkans foreign ministers at Lancaster House to discuss peace and stability in the region. But I completely agree with my honourable friend about malign Russian involvement in the Western Balkans, and we need to do more to bring Western Balkans into our circle, including by expanding trade, by expanding security relationships, so those countries have alternatives to dealing with Russia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary mentioned in her statement that the next week will be absolutely crucial for peace and security in Europe, and I'm sure that she'll see from members across this House that strong statements and signals will not work with Russia if we're to ensure that that conflict does not escalate. Does she agree with me that Russia's actions against Ukraine are a pattern of recent hostile activity, and that she needs to work to bring forward that coordinated response with our European partners to bring forward a deal to ensure that Russia's actions in Ukraine, Bosnia, Belarus and Bosnia come to an end? A coordinated action that this House should see sight of once agreed.
Yeah. That is absolutely the work the UK is doing. That's why we had a very extensive discussion at the G7 on this subject. We announced there would be severe consequences, and we are absolutely working on coordination. I think that's vital. It's very important the United States is involved. It's very important the EU is involved. It's very important the wider world is involved, because this is not just a threat to peace and stability in Europe. It is a global issue about whether or not we are clear that aggressors won't benefit from aggressive behaviour.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement, and which will inform the debate that we are having later about Russia's grand strategy. But can I just point out that we keep saying Russia's aggression must not be rewarded, but the past decade and a half have seen Russia's aggression effectively rewarded and go unpunished again and again and again. And to that extent, how can she ensure that the meetings taking place on the 9th and 10th of January in Geneva will actually mark a significant departure in past practice from the West? From now on, we are going to act much more decisively and be completely united. We cannot succumb to this divisive way that Russia is attempting to divide the United States from its other NATO allies.
I agree with my right honourable friend that we do need to step up our efforts as the free world. And in fact, I made a speech before Christmas saying that there hadn't been enough action. And peace and security in Europe and beyond had been taken for granted by not just the Western alliance, but also more broadly by the free world. So I agree with my honourable friend. That is why we are stepping up in terms of the work we're doing to challenge Russia, and we are also encouraging our allies. We're encouraging the United States and the EU, and we're working with them to develop these very clear consequences of any Russian action.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary claims that we have the toughest regime, but it seems, if you follow the money, that Russian oligarchs see the UK and its dependencies as the preferred safe deposit box for their investments. Perhaps the Foreign Secretary could just outline some of the considerations she's had with the Defence Secretary about what military involvement might be put into play from the UK. And secondly, can she just update the House on what her department's advice is to UK nationals either living in Ukraine or considering travelling to Ukraine?
As I've said, the Defence Secretary visited Ukraine in the autumn. We are providing all the support we can to Ukraine in terms of both economic resilience and security, namely helping with training troops, providing intelligence services, providing support for their naval vessels, and we continue to work to do that, and I'm coordinating very closely with the Defence Secretary.
Mark Francois.
Thank you. I welcome the robust tone of the Foreign Secretary's statement, and indeed the evident absolute unanimity within the House today on all sides to support the Ukrainian government and its people. But if something were to go horribly wrong in the Ukraine, the next domino in the chain would be the Baltic states, with whom we do have an Article 5 guarantee. So when she meets with other NATO foreign ministers tomorrow, can she absolutely assure those from the Baltic states that they have our complete support and that Estonia will never become a faraway country of which we know nothing?
I welcomed the Baltic states to the UK last autumn, and I was very clear about the UK's complete support for the Baltic states and our complete commitment to our Article 5 obligations. It's why we have the enhanced forward presence, which I visited in Tapa in Estonia, and alongside the discussions that are taking place on the subject of Ukraine through the NATO foreign ministers. Of course, we're also talking about how we strengthen our defensive capability to support our members, including the Baltic states, who really are on the frontier of freedom.
Jim Shannon.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for her very fulsome statement and ever mindful of the early morning reports of Russian sending armed troops to Kazakhstan that has led to death and destruction. As we watch Russian imperial aggression towards Ukraine, can I ask the Right Honourable Lady this? The West voice needs to be heard, must be heard. So what discussion has the Right Honourable Lady had with the United States of America, with key NATO allies, to respond to what could potentially be a powder keg with the fuse in Russian hands?
So I have had regular conversations with my counterpart, Tony Blinken, in the United States. I've talked to many of our NATO allies directly, and also to all of them at the NATO foreign ministers. We are all very much aligned in being clear that there will be severe consequences for Russia should they stage an incursion into Ukraine, and it's very important that we maintain that unanimity as we face further Russian rhetoric and Russian aggression.
Sir Edward Lee.
Unlike in Soviet times, Russia is no longer a viable candidate for world domination. Indeed, recently declassified documents from the United States make clear that in February 1990, Secretary of State James Baker gave a categoric assurance to President Gorbachev that NATO would not and had no plans to move eastwards. Given that the reality of the situation, despite everything that's been said today, is that we're not prepared to lose a single British soldier dying in a war to defend Ukraine, will the Secretary of State confirm that there are no plans to admit Ukraine to NATO? Indeed, to do that would be a needless and very dangerous provocation.
Well, I don't agree with my honourable friend. The UK remains supportive of Ukraine's NATO membership's aspirations in line with the 2008 Bucharest Summit Declaration. And as I've already pointed out, NATO is a defensive alliance, and the Russians know perfectly well it's a defensive alliance, and we should not buy into this narrative that somehow NATO is the problem. The problem is the troops that are being amassed on the Ukrainian border. Those troops are being amassed by Russia. They're not being amassed by NATO. So we have to be absolutely clear about that.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the statement, but can I encourage my right honourable friend to be far more robust in defence of pro-democracy forces in Kazakhstan and condemn unequivocally CSTO intervention in that country in support of a highly questionable regime, and ask her what discussion she's been having with players in the wider region about the instability that may be caused by Russia's intervention in mid-Asia, in particular Azerbaijan, in which we have significant interests and also what the implication for what's going on in the region will have for the recently concluded ceasefire in relation to Nagorno-Karabakh.
On the subject of the violent clashes in Kazakhstan, as I've said, we condemn the acts of violence, but I do think it's important to remember that Kazakhstan has a sovereign choice on who it chooses as its allies. Any forces deployed must have a clear mission and act proportionately in any use of force to defend the legitimate security interests in Kazakhstan. And it is important that we, whilst regretting and making sure that our thoughts are with those who have lost their lives, we do have to respect the fact that Kazakhstan has a sovereign choice on who it chooses as its allies.
Robert Jenrick.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for a strong and clear statement today? And I agree with her that we shouldn't accept the suggestion that NATO is in any sense other than a defensive alliance, nor indeed, and I don't expect her to say this today, that there's any imminent prospect of Ukraine becoming a NATO member of state. The Kremlin doesn't believe these things. They are merely pretexts to undermine a democratic and free society. The immediate concern is altering the cost-benefit analysis currently being undertaken by the Kremlin, and that is why the conversations that she will have in the coming days are so important with respect to sanctions and other actions. Would she confirm that she has had a direct conversation with the new German government about Nord Stream 2, and that she will ask them to halt the operationalisation of Nord Stream 2, because that is the single most important bargaining chip in the hands of Europe and NATO today?
Well, my right honourable friend is completely right about the pretext. This is exactly what is happening. Disinformation is being used. Pretexts are being claimed that simply don't exist because NATO is a defensive alliance. I did meet my German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock, on the margins of G7. Both I and the Prime Minister have been very clear that we do not believe Nord Stream 2 should go ahead.
Thank you,
Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for her robust and very clear statement on Russian aggression. It's fairly clear that Putin is peddling a particular narrative to the Russian people, trying to explain that the West is anti-Russia. The Kremlin publishing its extraordinary demands regarding Ukraine last month was a clear move to attempt to split the West. We must not bow to such pressure. We cannot show the Kremlin an ounce of weakness. Does my right honourable friend agree that we must stand firmly with our allies, such as Ukraine, such as Bosnia, but any other ally that is under the threat of Russian aggression?
My old friend is right. We have to defend the hard-won freedoms in the Balkans, in Ukraine, in the Baltic states. And she's also right to point out that the issue here is not the Russian people, who I'm a great admirer of Russia and the Russian people. The issue is the Putin regime and what is happening and what he is saying and the false pretext he is trying to create. And we have to be resolute to defend democracy and freedom in Europe, and that is why we are taking this strong stance on Ukraine and working with our allies around the world to challenge Russian aggression.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I first of all congratulate and warmly welcome my right honourable friend's world leadership on this issue and putting the UK firmly at the heart of taking this forward. My right honourable friend has mentioned Budapest 19 1994, of course, which we were a signatory to as well. So in light of that, could I urge my right honourable friend that when going into the negotiations, that there aren't any false lines drawn as to how far we are willing to go, that we don't actually say we're not willing to go beyond a point, because there have been some worrying statements coming out of the Ministry of Defence that may clamp my right honourable friend's hands whilst going into those negotiations.
The 1994 Budapest Memorandum is very clear, and it was done on the basis of Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons and being able to make sure that it maintained its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And that is a very important principle that will absolutely be upheld in the negotiations and discussions taking place next week.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement and strong approach. Now, what seems like a lifetime ago, I saw firsthand a breakdown in the Balkans when I served in Bosnia and Kosovo. And I never, even though it's a lifetime, what seems like a lifetime ago, I'd never want anyone to witness that again. Now, however unlikely it may seem, can we ensure that the best statescraft and diplomacy is used to allow Russia, if it should choose, to de-escalate and a route out of where this could be heading?
Well, first of all, can I thank my honourable friend for his service in the Balkans, and he is so right that that was very hard-earned peace and security, and we are determined not to allow that to slide away from us. And that is why we've appointed Sir Stuart Peach. That is why we're working on closer economic and security ties with the Balkan states so that they have an alternative to working with Russia. I believe the best way to challenge Russia is from a position of strength. We have to be clear that there would be severe consequences if there was to be an incursion into Ukraine. And we have to reduce European strategic dependency on Russia. That is the way that we are going to succeed, because there can't be any sense in which Russian aggression is rewarded, because, of course, it would have further consequences in terms of Russia's behaviour, but it would also encourage other aggressors around the world too, and damage peace and democracy globally.
Gareth Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Crime and Security Research Institute has found evidence that 32 media outlets across 16 different countries have been targeted by Russia via their reader comment section, peppering stories with anti-Western and anti-NATO statements. Can the Foreign Secretary, my right honourable friend, confirm and assure me that we are doing absolutely everything we can to tackle the Kremlin's reliance on misinformation and online manipulation?
Well, we have very strong cyber security forces here in the UK, and we are doing all we can to tackle Russian disinformation, including working with allies and partners. And we've recently signed a number of cyber agreements. We're working on these issues precisely with the Baltic states, which face a lot of Russian disinformation. And in fact, at the NATO foreign ministers meeting, we specifically talked about how we are going to make sure NATO as a whole is focusing more in the area of cyber and also areas like hybrid attacks, the use of migration as offensive weapons, to make sure NATO is not just operating in traditional spheres, but also many of the areas where modern combat is operating.
Rob Butler.
Speaker, I very much welcome the firm stance the Foreign Secretary has outlined about the way the UK is responding to Russia's intimidation of Ukraine. She's also set out clearly her own vision for global Britain and aim to build a network of liberty. Does she agree that in order to ensure that freedom and democracy do thrive around the world, our global partners will need to step up and join us in providing Ukraine with the support it needs? And that's not just words, also actions that might sometimes be difficult.
Excellent question.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to make sure that we are reducing economic dependency on Russia. We need to make sure that our words are followed up by the actions we've outlined, and we also need to make sure that all of our like-minded allies, whether it's the United States, the EU, or indeed allies around the world like India, Australia, Japan, are all part of building those closer economic and security ties so that we can deal with authoritarian regimes and make sure there are no rewards for aggression.
Last question, Richard Holden.
Deputy Speaker, in 2015 I visited Ukraine and Kiev with the then Foreign Secretary, the then Defence Secretary when I was a Special Advisor, to see Operation Orbital begin. We've now trained 20,000 soldiers in Ukraine through that operation. But does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that it's time for our partners to step up and start to provide some of the resources that we're providing? Because it's only by acting together on this international arena that we're going to really help stop Russia's aggression, not just in Ukraine, but across the Western Balkans and indeed in other parts of Central Asia as well.
My honourable friend is right, and we are coordinating very closely with the United States on providing support to Ukraine, including on security, but also on economic resilience, and making sure that Ukraine has the energy supplies they need as well. And I've also had a conversation with Josep Borrell of the EU about making sure the EU is doing what it can to support Ukraine, whether that's by reducing economic dependency on Russian gas or more direct support to Ukraine in terms of areas like trade as well as security.
I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement, and we now move on to the statement from Minister Victoria Atkins.
Oh. Madam Deputy Speaker, many thanks. May I start by, first of all, wishing you and the House a very happy new year, and also to welcome the Right Honourable Lady to her place. With permission, I would like to update the House on the Government's continuing support for Afghans. The United Kingdom has always been generous to those fleeing persecution. And last August, as the situation in Afghanistan deteriorated rapidly and dangerously, we worked at great speed to evacuate around 15,000 people to the United Kingdom and offer them immediate sanctuary and support. This number was the second largest number evacuated by any country, behind only the United States of America. Our priorities during Operation Pitting were clear: to save as many lives as possible while keeping the British public safe. The people evacuated included courageous Afghans who had worked closely with the British Armed Forces, as well as other vulnerable people at risk and British nationals and their families living in Afghanistan. Since that evacuation, we have helped a further 1,500 people enter the UK, including female judges, human rights defenders, and LGBT Afghans. And today, I'm pleased to inform the House that the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme opens formally. We will resettle up to 20,000 people under this scheme. I emphasise that this scheme is in addition to the Afghan Relocation and Assistance Policy, which provides a route to safety for any current or former locally employed staff working with the UK government, and around 7,000 people alone have already been helped through this scheme. It means that the United Kingdom has one of the world's most generous humanitarian offers to vulnerable Afghans. This is the government's new plan for immigration in action, through which we help those in greatest need via this safe and legal route. In September, we announced our aim to settle 5,000 people in the first year of the ACRS. In light of the emerging situation and the success of our evacuation efforts, we will exceed that aim. The first to be resettled under the new ACRS will be those already evacuated and in the UK. They include women's rights activists, journalists and prosecutors, as well as the Afghan families of British nationals. We are supporting those British nationals who have been assisted by Her Majesty's government to the UK, as well as their families who require such help, because we recognise that they experienced the same trauma and have the same needs as their Afghan neighbours fleeing Kabul alongside them. And whilst this policy work has been developed, we have got on with the job and now granted the first people indefinite leave to remain under the ACRS. And we will open 2 further referral pathways under the ACRS this year to bring more people here safely. From the spring, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees will refer refugees in need of resettlement who have fled Afghanistan. The UNHCR has the global mandate to provide international protection and humanitarian assistance to refugees. We will continue to receive such referrals to the scheme in coming years. The third referral pathway will resettle those at risk who supported the UK and international community effort in Afghanistan, as well as those who are particularly vulnerable, such as women and girls at risk and members of minority groups. In the first year of this third referral pathway, the government will honour our commitments and offer ACRS places to the most at risk British Council and Garda World contractors and Chevening alumni. The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office will be in touch with those eligible to support them through the next steps of this process. Beyond the first year of the ACRS, we will work with international partners and NGOs to design and deliver this unprecedented third referral pathway further. This will allow us to welcome wider groups of Afghans at risk beyond year 1. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said before, the capacity of the UK to resettle people is not unlimited. We have had to take some very difficult decisions about who will be prioritised for resettlement, and it is, frankly, for other countries to step up and follow the United Kingdom's ambitious lead. This scheme reflects the realities of the scale of the challenge, our previous pledges and our endeavours to resettle people well in the UK. And we continue our international efforts in Afghanistan and the region. In addition to continuing to bring at-risk people to the UK, we have been coordinating closely with international partners, including through our presidency of the G7. We have doubled our aid for Afghanistan to £286 million, including vital humanitarian assistance to save lives this winter. In conclusion, in the 4 months since Operation Warm Welcome has been launched, we have worked across 10 government departments with all devolved administrations, with around 350 councils and local agencies, as well as with charities and volunteers to offer a new start for our new citizens and the freedom to succeed in the United Kingdom. We have provided immediate sanctuary for more than 12,000 people, including accommodation, food, healthcare, education and support. More than 4,000 people have moved or are being moved into their new homes since the first Arab flight started in June. This is an unprecedented pace of resettlement. And I'm pleased to confirm with the House that, contrary to some reporting over Christmas, all children who were evacuated under Operation Pitting are now in school. And those children who have joined us since Operation Pitting closed are, of course, being placed in schools as quickly as possible. 97% of evacuees are registered with GPs, and everyone has been offered COVID vaccinations. We've launched a brand new housing portal on gov.uk for members of the public to offer accommodation. We're working with the regulators of professions to assess and recognise Afghans' qualifications, especially in sectors that need recruits, such as teaching and healthcare. We have made it easier for local community groups to support Afghans through the Community Sponsorship Scheme, which will begin welcoming Afghan families later this month. We've developed a new integration programme tailored to the needs of this traumatised group of people, which has been piloted and we will be rolling out shortly. And we are creating from scratch a new approach to employment, housing and integration to help Afghans become self-sufficient as quickly and as well as they can. This is the new plan for immigration in action. Now, I've always acknowledged that resettling such large numbers of people well will take time and it demands care. I therefore urge colleagues across the House to work with their councils and communities to help us build bright futures for our new Afghan citizens. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her statement this morning, an advance copy of it. It is now 5 months since the devastating scenes at Kabul airport and 5 months since the shambolic withdrawal of the UK, US and other troops leaving the Taliban in charge and putting those who had worked for our armed forces on our government projects and who stood up to the Taliban at dangerous risk from retribution and persecution. And I welcome and pay tribute to the armed forces who ran Operation Pitting to get so many people out at the last minute. But all of us in this Parliament know that the operation between government departments was chaotic, lacked proper senior support and should have been planned many months previously, and all of us know that many more lives have been put at risk because of those government failings. The Prime Minister and the Home Secretary rightly promised we would help both those to whom we owed direct obligations, British citizens, their families, those who worked for us and on our projects, and also that we would do our bit alongside other countries to resettle others whose lives were at risk through the Afghan resettlement scheme. And they reassured us many times that resettlement scheme would be 20,000 people in addition to those to whom we owed direct obligations. And rightly they promised that the UK government will always stand by those in the world in their hour of need when fleeing persecution or oppression. Well, 5 months and thousands of hours have passed since then until the resettlement scheme is now opened. Since then, we've seen a truly dire humanitarian crisis escalate in Afghanistan, with those we promised to help still in peril, British nationals and British council staff and others still in hiding, family members have been executed, and NGOs with staff who worked on UK contracts saying that 95% of those staff not only did not get out, they still haven't even had replies from the British government to their ARAP applications. That is shameful. So does the Minister accept that the delays in setting up the resettlement scheme and the complete failure to respond to so many of those ARAP relocation applications from people who worked on UK projects have broken some of those important promises and put lives at risk? On the resettlement scheme, at the heart of her announcement appears to be the statement that, in fact, the first people to be helped will actually be people who are already here, and she appeared to suggest that that would include the Afghan families of British nationals and British nationals themselves. Could she please clarify? Clearly, British nationals and their families should get support, but why are they being counted in the resettlement scheme? Can she reassure us that those Afghan family members and British citizens are not being counted in the resettlement places that the government has promised? Could she also tell us how many of those now counted as part of the resettlement scheme are going to people who were previously counted in the relocation scheme? She will know there is huge concern about rumours that government departments have been trading people and trying to shunt people around in order to reduce the number of people who would be supported, and she will understand how deeply shameful that would be if it were true. Can she please clarify? And can she give us a clear fact? How many people will additionally be arriving in the UK as part of the resettlement scheme between now and September? She must have a number for that further number to be helped this year. Can she please tell us on the detail of the scheme? On the UNHCR referrals, why are they not starting until the spring and how many will there be? On the third pathway, which refers to the British Council and Achieving Scholars, that is very welcome. But what about the other NGOs and contractors who've had staff working on UK contracts? Is she saying that they won't get any reply or any help until next year? What are people currently in hiding supposed to do until then? She hasn't also included an additional further family route within the resettlement scheme. She'll know that is something I have been pressing her on for those who have family here in the UK to be able to apply to be included in the resettlement scheme if their lives are at risk because they have family in the UK and who could indeed care for them. And I would say to her, I'm really worried that those who are at risk from the Taliban, who have connections here to the UK, are at risk of exploitation by people traffickers and smugglers as they get desperate. We've already heard of increasing numbers of Afghans arriving in Calais. We've had a report of an Afghan soldier who arrived here with his family by flimsy boat, being exploited by traffickers and criminal gangs. Those who helped our armed forces should not be ending up in a flimsy boat in peril on the cold sea of the English Channel. So would she accept the government needs to urgently sort out the resettlement places, the relocation for those we no obligations to, and support and routes for family members? Otherwise, more people will be exploited by those criminal gangs and more people will be at risk. And can she finally say, what is the government doing to show international leadership in partnership to ease the terrible humanitarian crisis that is escalating now in Afghanistan, without which action we will see not just the humanitarian crisis, but also the refugee crisis get worse?
Minister. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her questions. I would, if I may, at the start, just take issue with her description of the evacuation of 15,000 human beings from Afghanistan in the incredibly dangerous circumstances that we all saw on our television screens in August as shambolic. That was not a word I would have used to the brave soldiers and armed forces personnel who arrived in this House only a month ago and whom we all thanked for their very, very significant and brave efforts. In terms of ARAP, the ARAP flight started in June. Just to give an idea of the scale of this, we have received over 99,000 applications to the scheme since April this year. Sorry, flight started in June. The ARAP scheme started in April last year. And we are working at pace to assess these on a case-by-case basis. As this House has heard before, we do have to be very careful about the security situation. There are sadly some who claim to be eligible for these schemes who are not. I remember particularly an intervention from my honourable friend from Wellingborough in a previous statement setting out the circumstances of an individual who's claiming to be someone they are not. We therefore need to ensure that security checks are conducted and that the right people, accurately identified as having been eligible under ARAP, are brought over and helped. We have a dedicated team working 7 days a week to process and bring eligible Afghans to the UK. We completely reject the accusation that the ARAP programme has been ineffective, and the work of the MOD and others continues to identify those who are eligible under ARAP. Now, in terms of British nationals and their families, I'm very, very happy to clarify that. British nationals are still being supported. Ordinarily, British nationals arriving in the United Kingdom would not receive the level of support that they are doing at the moment, but we have been realistic. We have understood that their needs are such that if they have assisted the government, that if they have been assisted by the government to come to the United Kingdom before the launch of this scheme, then they should be treated in parity with those who flew with them, next to them in planes across from Kabul and so on. In terms of families, they are being included. Non-British families, Afghan families, are being included in the ACRS because, again, this scheme is about helping those who are at risk. People have been evacuated because they are at risk, and we want to give them that support. And I think helping their families, as well as British nationals, is a very, very generous offer to the residents. And this is particularly why we are able to exceed our initial, very ambitious intention to rehome 5,000 people in the first year. We have managed to exceed that. Again, there were comments about trading people. I just don't think that these are appropriate phrasing for officials who are working across government very, very hard to try to bring human beings to this country who we understand are at very, very grave risk for their safety. As I, again, have said throughout, this is very difficult. We are going to have to make some very difficult decisions. There are a population of approximately 40 million people in Afghanistan, and very many of them are very scared. And so we must apply these principles and apply them knowing that there will be some whom we can't help, very sadly. In terms of UNHCR, I note, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of UNHCR, we're hoping that from the spring we can begin to bring people forward. We've been working with the UNHCR and other international organisations throughout this process to make this, to stand this scheme up. And in terms of her very understandable concerns about illegal migration, the flimsy boats across the channels, people being in desperate need of help and being in the plight of being in the hands of people traffickers, we agree with her, which is why we brought forward the Nationality and Borders Bill, and we would love the Labour Party to accept it.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I commend not only the statement today, but the deep commitment that my honourable friend shows to this particular task. I'm grateful. We should all be grateful that she's there at this time. Can I ask her and press her upon the plight of Afghan judges? There is continuing concern about the safety of many judges who frankly are now a target for the new regime because of the decisions that they made under the previous regime. Two things. One, will she update the House as to the safe progress of judges to the United Kingdom, and also the work of the UK government in helping to signpost judges to third countries as part of an international effort to safeguard their interests?
Well, may I thank my right honourable friend and congratulate him on his further elevation, and I'm delighted that his skills and experience have been recognised. The care of judges, Afghan judges, particularly female judges, I know is a matter that interests many colleagues across the House. We have offered a home to more than 20 senior Afghan judges and prosecutors and their dependents already. We cannot, sadly, offer a home to all Afghan judges, but we look to others in the international community to play their part in supporting those who have upheld the rule of law. We really must work together across the international community to support such people, and I'm very, very happy. I'll be delighted to meet him and others to discuss further how we can signpost the judges to third countries as well as to our own in order to ensure that they are safe.
SNP spokesperson Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement. I'd also like to welcome the Shadow Home Secretary to her place. I welcome the fact that finally the scheme is starting, but it has taken far too long. The Minister talked about the emerging situation in Afghanistan. It's not emerging. She just said herself that ARAP started in April, and there was an emergency in August, so it's not emerging. And I do welcome some of the specifics in the statement, for example, working to recognise Afghan qualifications to enable people to work in their profession here. But it feels like there's been a bit of sleight of hand, and I want to know more about these figures. They can't keep patting themselves on the back saying up to 20,000 people, because any number below 20,000 is up to 20,000. So I think we have to be clear about that. And I share concerns about restricting ARAP criteria, leading to understandable suspicion about the reasons, and the expose in the Times I found deeply worrying. I've got a number of questions. I want to ask the Minister if those who are here on ARAP that are being transferred to the ACRS retain the right to family reunion, and that's something I hope she will answer today, and I very much hope she'll be able to allay fears on that. And I was a bit confused reading through the statement. Do people have to be identified, or can they apply for this scheme? And is it possible, because my reading of the statement was that it could be 2023 before any new Afghans arrive in this country? Surely that can't be right. The Minister rightly talks about British nationals in Afghanistan experiencing the same trauma and having the same needs as their Afghan neighbours. But what about those who did it, who got out, who arrived here or will arrive by boat, Are their traumas and their needs not the same? The Nationality and Borders Bill says not. It says they are illegal, that they could face up to 4 years in jail, that they could be offshored, never to be reunited with their families. She also talked of welcoming women and girls after year one. Nargis is 19. She and her husband have fled to Pakistan, not realising she would be in danger there too. She's pleading with me for the sake of her unborn baby to help her escape. And I told her I would have news in January. Can the Minister please tell me what I should tell her now? Also, some of my constituents have family in hiding in Afghanistan, and I've not heard anything today about how they can apply, and that if anyone can apply. And that's crucial because the more vulnerable you are, the less you're able to flee to a neighbouring country. So how does someone in danger in Afghanistan apply? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I spoke to the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities this morning. They've been calling for details for some time, so they welcome this confirmation, but they had a number of questions, but the biggest one is, will everyone with indefinite leave to remain get refugee status? Because that gives different rights, and the families they're working with need to know so they can make informed decisions. All 32 Scottish councils stand ready to support the Afghan schemes, and I hope the Minister can give a bit more detail to them in her response.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions. Just to help her understand, the ARAP scheme stands alongside ACRS, so there's no question of people being transferred between the schemes. If people have met the eligibility under ARAP, they remain under ARAP, and the ACRS scheme is, if you like, the civilian scheme, whereas ARAP looks particularly after locally employed staff who worked with the government and with the armed forces. ARAP principals have been evacuated, some 7,000, including dependents. We have throughout this extracted not just principals but also their spouse, their partner and children or dependents under the age of 18. That is why we have one of the issues with housing so many people at once is the size of the families that some of the families were having to rehouse. We do have people arriving. Again, I hope the House understands the security situation in the region is such that we can't give definite numbers about who will arrive when each week, because by definition there are many, many factors out of our control, but some 1,500 people have already arrived since Operation Pitting was closed, both under ARAP and will fall to be eligible under the ACRS schemes. She speaks about the very, very troubling case that she has raised. Again, I hope she will understand, and I've made this clear in previous statements, I cannot give advice off the cuff at the dispatch box for people who are in great danger. But we are working closely with countries in the region to find safe routes for eligible Afghans to be evacuated from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. These efforts are ongoing and will continue as the situation changes and develops. We're very, very keen to emphasise that the safety and security of eligible Afghans and their families is paramount. And indeed, the Minister for Armed Forces visited the region recently to identify what more we can do to work with both third country and in-country applicants. We are exploring a range of options. I cannot go into details, but we are very much working with a wide range of allies and partners to see what more can be done. And finally, I genuinely welcome the support of Scottish councils to play their part in our United Kingdom-wide effort to give homes to our new Afghan citizens. In relation to refugee status, those who come under the UNHCR scheme will be given refugee status by virtue of being referred by the UNHCR. We do not plan to do the same for others, simply because everyone who comes under ARAP and ACRS will have indefinite leave to remain and will be free to work, to enjoy their lives, to build their homes, to build their futures as any other person with indefinite leave to remain in the United Kingdom.
Order. Before we go any further, I do need to stress that we've got a lot of people who want to contribute to this statement. We've got an important backbench business debate afterwards, which is well subscribed. So I would ask that colleagues put one question to the Minister to allow the Minister to give brief replies. Very important, but we do need to move a little more quickly than we are at the moment if I've got any hope of getting everybody in. So Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I return briefly to the point raised in relation to judges and prosecutors by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for South Swindon. She will know that much work has been done by judges and lawyers in this country, people like the noble Lord Goldsmith, Baroness Kennedy, Dame Maura McGowan, who she and I both know, have done much to try and assist in this. There is a concern as to how the practical outworking of this will develop as the scheme goes forward. The scheme itself is welcome, but will she be prepared to meet with me and other interested parties to discuss the practical ways in which we can help these judges and prosecutors, particularly women, who many of whom, after all, put their lives in the line to assist and protect British troops when prosecuting and judging those who had committed atrocities against our own people.
I very much thank my honourable friend, and I would be delighted to meet him and others involved in this effort. We are very, very conscious of the debt that we owe to such judges, and it's why I'm very pleased that we've been able to welcome some already, but I do very much want to listen to the concerns in relation to others.
Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for her statement this morning? I know that the Home Affairs Select Committee will want to look in detail at the Afghan citizens resettlement scheme in the coming months and take evidence from the Minister. But can I press the Minister on one issue that we raised at a recent Home Affairs Select Committee meeting, which is the problem of those local authorities who do not put themselves forward for schemes like this, and therefore the burden is not evenly shared across the country. So will councils be compelled to participate? And when councils are involved in these schemes, can she guarantee the Home Office will be constructive, consulting with those councils and providing the resources those councils need?
Well, may I welcome the Right Honourable Lady to her new place, and I very much look forward, I think, to being scrutinised by that formidable committee. I'm very, very happy to, first of all, thank those local authorities. Some local authorities have gone way beyond what we could even hope in terms of offering actual properties for people to move into. It's why we've been able to achieve already 4,000 people being moved into or about to be moved into their homes. This is an unprecedented scale. If I compare it to the Syrian resettlement scheme, that was 5,000 people being resettled in a year. We've managed around 4,000 in just 6 months. But there is so much more to do. And so we are still very much working with councils to encourage and persuade, very much clarify the funding arrangements, because I know for some they've had concerns about that, but we really must have every council play their part so that we can welcome people across the country and they can contribute to our local communities across the United Kingdom.
Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I too congratulate my honourable friend on everything that she's achieving. I listened very carefully to the answer she gave on safe routes to the SNP. Can I just put before her the plight of people in Wickham who have family in Afghanistan, where they believe that those family members were eligible for visas before the evacuation. But of course now they're in hiding very often and afraid, and they don't have a means to get that visa and come and join their family in the UK. So could I ask her, please, what we should be telling those people? Will we honour the visas and how? Thank you.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend because I know this is an issue that is concerning many constituents. We have the safe and legal routes under the new plan for immigration, of which ACRS and ARAP are one. The family reunion rules will continue to apply. I do appreciate the difficulty that some have in relation to still being in Afghanistan. This is why the work of my honourable friend, the Minister for Armed Forces, is so important, because it's with working with countries in region that we're going to be able, I hope, to find other routes out. But we must very much emphasise to those individuals in Afghanistan that, of course, they will have a far better evaluation of their own safety and what they need to do to keep safe than sadly I can offer today at the dispatch box.
Tim Farron.
Speaker, back in the summer, when the government announced the scheme, we were told, and I quote, "Priority will be given to women and girls and religious and other minorities who are most at risk of human rights abuses and dehumanising treatment by the Taliban." Yet the Minister has just told us in the statement that women and children, LGBT people and people from religious minorities will not be able to apply until year 2 of the scheme. Back in the summer, they were a priority. Now they will feel betrayed and abandoned to persecution or worse. So will she reconsider her decision?
happy to correct the honourable gentleman, because he will know that we have already flown over people who fulfil those criteria. So, for example, 3 cohorts of LGBT Afghans have now been helped by the government and civil society partners to leave Afghanistan. The government is working with Stonewall, Micro Rainbow and other LGBT charities to support those cohorts and help set up their new lives in the UK. And the point about recognising the vulnerabilities of those who have already been flown to the UK is significant, because the groups that he understandably highlights in his question are amongst those who have already been evacuated, and which I have been clear throughout my appearances, both at the dispatch box, but also importantly in our statement of the 13th of September, would fall to be eligible under the ACRS.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you very much. Can my right honourable friend, I just want to say the Afghan Citizen Resettlement Scheme is quite clearly one of the most generous in the entire world, as she's quite rightly set out at the dispatch box. Would she agree with me that 20,000 people is a very, very significant number, and it continues to reflect the fact that the United Kingdom has been one of the most hospitable countries to help people in need throughout the world, but provided people come here by safe and legal means?
Very much so, and of course the honourable gentleman knows that in addition to the ACRS we also have the ARAP scheme, which continues, and MOD officials and armed forces personnel continue to work on very, very tightly. So whilst we have set the limit at up to 20,000 under the ACRS, the ARAP scheme sits alongside that and has no such limit. International comparisons are difficult, but the equivalent figure for the United States, for example, would be over 100,000, and we don't believe that any other country thus far would exceed 10,000. And so we do believe that we can be proud of what we have achieved, but of course very much recognising that there is a lot of hard work ahead of us to ensure that once people are evacuated to the United Kingdom, they are given the warm welcome that we have rightly promised.
So Khan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is worsening by the day. Huge numbers of population do not even know where the next meal will come from as they endure harsh winter conditions. Islamic Relief is one of the few organizations working on the ground providing emergency relief. Yet despite this, the eligibility for ARAP was narrowed by the Home Office in December. The government has a moral responsibility and duty to protect all vulnerable Afghans. So will the Minister now reverse that decision?
Minister?
Well, may I take this opportunity to thank not just the honourable gentleman, but actually his local councils in Manchester, who have done a great job of looking after people both in bridging accommodation, but I know also want to take people permanently as well. In relation to ARAP, that was, and I believe my honourable friend, the Minister for Armed Forces, has used the phrase necessary housekeeping. We had to clarify the rules, the eligibility criteria, to remove uncertainty around who can qualify, and by making it clearer for those who think they might be eligible, it will lead to more consistent decision making. Spouses and partners, along with children under the age of 18, will qualify as ARAP dependents under the immigration rules, and they'll be eligible for relocation if the lead applicant is successful.
Julie Lewis.
Deputy Speaker, the Minister mentioned former Chevening scholars being eligible under one strand of the new scheme. May I once again draw the attention of the House to the scholars who are fully validated and fully funded already by the Council for At-Risk Academics, which has been rescuing people at risk of oppression who are scholars since 1933. Most of these people, a limited number they have validated and are funding, are actually applying for ordinary student visas, but it's taking a very long time. Could she look into that and speed it up?
I'd be very happy, and may I thank my right honourable friend for the efforts he has made consistently to help these academics. It may be that we're able to find a route through the expansion of the sponsorship scheme, the local community sponsorship scheme, but let me take that away, meet with him, and we will see what can happen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. She'll know a warm welcome the Minister in my own constituency, Cardiff South and Penarth, from local authorities, Welsh Government and community organisations. That's why it's particularly frustrating to me that I haven't been able to resolve a number of the complex cases that I've raised with her and other ministers. And I have one case in particular involving a British council contractor should have been eligible under ARAP, is actually out of Afghanistan now in Qatar, but separated from their family in the UK. Are they supposed to continue now under ARAP, or do they go under this third route? And would she meet with me to discuss that and the case involving children under the age of 18 who are still separated from their families in the UK we raised in October?
I'm very grateful to all local authorities and the ones in his constituency who are helping. I will happily meet him. As I can't give an answer at the dispatch box, I hope he'll realise, but very much I will meet him imminently to discuss the case he raises.
Speaker, I thank my honourable